You're listening to the New Heroes of Old novelcast, written and read by author Greg Bulmash. Season 1, Hell on $5 a Day. Episode 12. Chapter 12. Rollin on the River. Checking his watch, Kurt saw that he'd only been walking for about 10 minutes, even if it felt like an hour. He used the rising slope of the cavern's roof to guide him, and he was still in the forest. Thankfully, there had been no signs of Robe Guy, no sound of a twig breaking nearby or Robe Guy yelling in the distance. In fact, it had been eerily silent. There were no bird noises. He'd seen no insects. It was as if the vapor-rub trees were the only living things in the forest, save for him. After another 15 minutes of hiking, the forest came to an abrupt end, bordered by a grassy strip about 50 yards across, leading down to a rocky riverbank. The bulk of the river was shrouded in fog, about 20 feet high, that tracked the curve of the river. It ran away to both sides as far as he could see, following the curve of the cavern wall. The forest did too. It was like they'd been planned. Directly in front of him, there was the fog, then empty air as the cavern's roof rose higher and higher, blurring in the far distance miles away. At what seemed to be the center of the roof, a giant jet of red flame shot down through a bank of clouds like the exhaust of a larger rocket than Kurt had ever seen. It was the light source for the cavern, and it burned almost as bright as the sun. It was hot, too. Kurt hadn't noticed the heat when he first fell into the cavern, but it had to be in the low 80s at least. He was tired, sweaty, and thirsty, even with his jacket tied around his waist. He walked down toward the river. He'd get a drink from it and then follow it along until he came to a place where he could cross, perhaps even find some sign of habitation. Any sign of life would be nice, actually. It felt like he was the only living soul for miles. As he reached the bank of the river, the idea of drinking from it became less attractive. He had no idea where he was, and river water wasn't necessarily all that safe. With only the printouts in his backpack or those six-pointed leaves to serve as emergency toilet paper, he really didn't need to pick up a case of the trots. Still, if the water was cool, he could splash some on his head and neck. He knelt down on one of the rocks and was lowering his hand toward the water when he heard a motor out on the river. He couldn't locate its source in the fog, but the noise was unmistakable. It was a boat. "Hey!" he shouted, standing up and waving his hands. "Hey! Over here!" Slowly the sound grew nearer, coming out of the dense fog, gradually turning into a canopied, flat-bottomed boat with a driver and no passengers. Kurt stood on the bank, waving his arm and watching the boat approach. As the boat neared within a few feet, the boatman, a scraggly and dirty-looking man in a robe, cut the engine and threw a rope. Kurt caught it and pulled, towing the boat into shore, as the old tires on the side of the boat banged against the rocks. Kurt jumped into the rear. The boatman's back was to him, and Kurt could see rips and patches on his robe as a hank of dirty, matted hair fell down from his head to just under his shoulders, looking more like a group of hair slabs than individual strands. "Fare for crossin' is 1 coin, the man said, turning in his seat to face Kurt. As he saw Kurt, the man's jaw dropped, showing the 5 or so teeth in his mouth, and his dull eyes went wide. "Bouncin' Beelzebub," he whispered. "You're alive." Kurt reached into his pocket, jingling the change. "Sure I'm alive. Why shouldn't I be?" His look shifted to one of amusement. "Have I been on the news? Did they say those girls killed me?" Kurt pulled a quarter out of his pocket and dropped it in the man's hand, looking at him expectantly, waiting for an answer. The man's face was riddled with tiny scars, as if he'd had horrendous acne or a bad case of the chickenpox as a kid, and they had to be pretty bad to be visible underneath the layers of grime. There was a large boil under his left eye, and the 3 hairs growing out of the mole on his right cheek looked like they might be longer than the scraggly beard that grew along his jaw. A slimy tongue dropped out of the man's mouth and wiped saliva across his lower lip. "No, he said. Kurt laughed. The guy had to be pulling his leg. Then why are you surprised I'm alive? Did you hear about that fight? The man's jaw slowly rose, closing his mouth as the tongue flicked out to wet his lips again. You don't have any idea where you are, do you? Not really, Kurt said cautiously. The man licked his lips again. What religion are you? Why? So I can name it with the name you use. Kurt shrugged. I was raised Jewish, but I'm sort of agnostic. I guess I'm more spiritual than religious. Kurt paused as the man looked at him impatiently. Just tell me all the names. The man shoved the quarter into the pocket of his robe. Well, some called it Abaddon, Gehenna, Sheol, Hades. Most people nowadays just call it hell. Kurt stepped to the side of the boat and looked up, staring at the fire shooting down from the cavern's roof. Your name's Karen, he said slowly, just above a whisper, as he looked at the flames and remembered a college mythology class. The ferryman. Well, now you know where you are. Still want to cross? Kurt looked toward the cavern wall. Is there a way out back there? There used to be a tunnel, but the Greeks kept coming down and trying to rescue people, so they closed it off. The only way out is to go all the way through. Kurt sat down slowly on the hard wood bench. He looked at his hands, turning them in front of him. And I'm not dead. No, doesn't seem so. Kurt sat in stony silence, his eyes unfocused. Look, Karen said, I've got a business to run. Are you crossing or not? Might as well, I guess. Karen kicked the engine into gear and began the slow trek into the fog. The first touch of the fog on Kurt's skin wasn't cool. It was cold, close to freezing. And though they moved slowly through it, he could hear the wind scream past his ears as if they were racing. He couldn't think. He could barely breathe, the fog burning his throat with its chill each time he inhaled. He looked out into the fog, watching it swirl around him, blown by the same wind he heard but couldn't feel, just as the fog was cold but not wet. The eddies of the fog made patterns, and sometimes it would seem as if a swirl gaped open in the center, a hole appearing in it, issuing out the wind's mournful wail. His jacket was quickly untied from his waist, put on, zipped up, and he put his hands over his ears, both for warmth and to block out the shriek of the wind. It was the saddest sound he'd ever heard, like a mother crying over her dead child, and it nearly broke his heart. Between the chill and that wind, Kurt just wanted to curl up into a fetal position on the floor of the boat, trying to preserve both his body heat and his sanity. As the boat found its way out of the mist, the wind's wail fell behind them. The air warmed, and the whiteness turned to pink, then orange. Then they moved into open air. Kurt felt like he'd stepped out of a freezer and into an oven. The difference was so marked. But it was a relief. The shore ahead was a gently sloping dirt bank, another grassy meadow beyond it. And beyond that, signs of life? Kurt shook his head. They were signs of habitation. Signs of life would be too much to hope for. How do you stand that noise? Oh, Karen said nonchalantly. You get used to it. Kurt shuddered. The human mind had a capacity for adaptation that let it get used to some pretty awful stuff. But getting used to that? Still, Karen was pretty much created for the job as far as Kurt knew. It's not like he got the job off Craigslist. Now there was a thought. Hades Craigslist, men seeking women. Rollin on the river. I'm just looking for a lady who likes semen, JKLOL. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or cringe at that one, though the word inappropriate blinked on and off in his mind's eye. Kurt was tossed out of his mental amusement park when Karen cut the motor 10 feet from shore, pulling them into the soft bank. Far side, Karen said, smiling. his hand out for a tip as they nudged against the shore. Kurt stood and looked at the hand. The palm was as dirty as the rest of the man. He reached into his pocket and grabbed whatever coins were left, reaching out to drop them into it, and stopped. "No," he said, putting the coins back in his pocket. "I might need these for a return trip." A sound came from Karen, a chuckle building slowly into a guffaw, and then into a laugh. The laugh grew into a roar, and he had to grip one of the poles holding up the tattered canopy to steady himself. Kurt leapt out of the boat onto the bank, making sure not to splash into the water, and walked away, Karen still in stitches behind him. Wait, don't go yet. Please hit like and subscribe to encourage my behavior. Knowing people are reading or listening is what keeps me going. If you can't wait for the other episodes, check out the audiobook at bounce.ws/books. That's bounce.ws/BOOKS. And please visit bulmash.com for the latest updates on the novels, podcasts, and the journey from here to Season 12. The New Heroes of Old Novelcast is read and produced by Greg Bulmash and distributed by Bulmash Media, LLC. Copyright 2026 by Greg Bulmash. Music is from the YouTube audio library. The opening music is Jungle by Akash Gandhi. The closing music is Better by Anno Domini Beats. Thanks for listening, and remember to come back soon.